Singapore has excelled in almost every aspect imaginable. From a tiny village, we have transformed ourselves into a cosmopolitan city beyond recognition in under just 50 years. However, in the recent years, much attention has been placed on hidden communities in Singapore. So what are hidden communities? Hidden communities are communities that are isolated from the society and have little or close to no interaction with the public. For example, a migrant construction worker might be part of a hidden community where he's usually confined to his workspace and his living space, which usually are the dormitories. As such, this leaves him little or close to no interaction with the public. But this won't be my main focus of today's talk. Instead, I'll be looking at a specific community within the hidden communities itself. But before I go on, I'd like to ask all of you, what comes to your mind when you think about this word, sex? To some of you in the audience, you might feel a sense of excitement, enthusiasm towards this word. Weird pictures come to your mind. Whereas the other audience might feel a sense of mixed feelings, and some may even not want to talk about it. But the moment I add the word worker to form the word sex worker, what comes to your mind right now? To some people, it may be beneficial for the economy. To others, this may bring up emotions such as shame, guilt, and even fear. Now, why do some people feel these feelings when it comes to sex workers? Because they perceive sex workers to be engaging in an activity that is seen as immoral, and some people may feel that engaging in sex work is considered shameful. And some of us would even stay as far as possible away from sex workers when we see them in public, because we are afraid that they might be aggressive or they might even cause a stir-up in the public. Today, I'm here to question these assumptions and these feelings that we might have towards sex workers, and why, whenever we come across a sex worker, we might feel a sense of discomfort. So if you see a sex worker, probably in the bus, you might tend to pass quick judgments about the sex worker. But today, I'm here to question these assumptions and ensure that we are more aware of the sex industry. So to do that, I'm going to be debunking 3 big myths that surround the sex workers. So without further ado, let me begin with the first myth, that brothels are illegal in Singapore. Well, when I was a bit younger, when I was a bit more oblivious of my surroundings and Singapore, I used to think that brothels were completely illegal in Singapore. I thought that if I saw a brothel anywhere in Singapore, I had to report it to the authorities. But the thing is that when I enlisted into national service and when I served the army, I had many friends who patronized this place where brothels would exist, and they call these the red light areas. They would ask me to join them. And in some instances, I would decline because I thought that it was immoral. I thought that these people were, all the feelings that I've listed just now, disgust, shame, and fear, all these feelings would come to me. But one day, out of this curiosity, I decided to join my friends to go to these red light areas, not to engage in sexual activity, of course, but instead to be an observer, just to walk and observe these places in Singapore. So I went to places like Geylang, Little India, as well as Petain Road. And what I observed was something that I believe not many Singaporeans have seen in Singapore. And I went home and I did extensive research on whether brothels are illegal in Singapore or if they are legal. And I found out that brothels are indeed legal in Singapore. They are legal only if they have a license. And this license is issued by the police. How do you get a license? This process is not disclosed to the public. But even if you have a license for a brothel, the sex workers who are operating within these brothels also require a license. And this is famously known as the yellow card, or in Singaporean terms, you call it the work permit. Now, what is this work permit? This work permit is issued by the police in order to help the police identify sex workers. And their personal particulars are also included in this work permit. And if sex workers do not have this work permit, they are vulnerable to violent raids by the authorities. And other issues that I'll discuss later. Now, there are close to 800 to 1,000 sex workers in Singapore who are considered legal. And there are many more that operate illegally. So keep this number in mind later. Now, that takes me to my second myth, that sex workers enjoy their job. This is a very common myth. When I was a little younger, I used to think that sex is the most amazing activity in the world. I used to think that it brings about great pleasure and it's really a form of excitement when you have sex. But imagine having sex all day with different kinds of people. Imagine having sex more than 5 times per day with 5 different kinds of people who have different sexual appetite. Now that must be exhausting physically as well as emotionally. And this is what sex workers have to go through on a day-to-day basis, especially when they have a lot of customers during peak hours like Saturday, Sunday, and any other public holiday like yesterday. Now, sex workers truly never enjoy their job, especially most of them. Why do I say this? Because even if you perceive sex workers to be superhuman and can overcome this exhaustion that they face physically as well as mentally, sex workers never truly enjoy their job. Why is that so? Because sex workers are often vulnerable to physical abuse, mental abuse, verbal abuse, violence, theft, as well as rape. These are many problems that we are oblivious to. Why do sex workers face this? It's because when clients get too emotional, they tend to let their emotions get the best out of them. And this becomes the worst nightmare for any sex worker, because in most instances, sex workers have to undergo these struggles that many of us don't even think about. Now, I'd like to bring about a story that I read just recently, which was the story of Elise. Elise was a transgender sex worker who was from Manila, Philippines, who came to Singapore to earn a decent living. One day, while she was performing sex work, she was approached by this police impersonator who came up to her and asked her for a specified amount. When she was a bit apprehensive and when she didn't trust this impersonator, she actually refused to hand over this specified amount. But when she refused, this police impersonator actually physically abused her. And this is what happened after the impersonator abused her. And she was left with scars on her hand. And that was not all. This police impersonator actually called the real cops on her, and she was then arrested and placed on special pass before she had to go back to Philippines. Now, what does this story tell us? This story tells us how sex workers have to face this grueling experience from time to time, because sex workers do not have this rosy feeling of having sex all day and feeling happy. They have to face these harsh realities. And I think it's time that we start to realize that sex workers are not enjoying their job. And in fact, in most instances, they are suffering. Now, the last myth that I have for today is that sex work is consensual. It's very common for us to have this idea that the moment I sign up as a sex worker, I am willing to consent. I'm willing to consent for any activity to be done for the client, and any sexual activity is consented. But this is not true, because sex workers also are human beings too. They too require consent if they want to perform any sexual activity. And in most instances, clients themselves get so emotional that they do not even ask consent to sex workers. And as a result, this leaves them violently raped by their clients. I repeat, they are violently raped by their clients. Can you imagine if any one of our friends here or family members could actually be a sex worker, and if they were violently raped, how would you feel? You would definitely not feel any form of happiness. You won't feel like they're having a good time. Instead, you will feel angry. You will feel emotional, and you would want to do something about it. And that's why people tend to ask this very important question: why sex work? People tend to openly confront sex workers and ask them, why do you choose to perform, why do you choose to engage in a profession that is widely known as immoral, dirty, shameful, or any other negative emotion? Why do you choose this industry if people perceive it to be immoral? Now, before we even ask that question, I think we should all take a step back and understand the stories of the sex workers. I grew up with this famous saying that goes, "Don't judge me if you don't know my story." And I think we are all very familiar with that saying. But it's very funny how this saying actually applied to most of our lives, but it never really applied to the lives of sex workers. Why? Maybe we perceive sex workers to be not part of us. And what I found out was that there were many sex workers who had a lot of stories to tell me when I actually met one sex worker. 2 years ago, I actually met a sex worker who was actually from Vietnam. And when I spoke to her, I realized that she had a lot of stories to tell me. She told me that she had to feed her family back in Vietnam, and this was the only source of income. She had 2 children and had to feed them. And when she told me that she had problems back home feeding her children and ensuring that they had to go to school, that's when I felt that I need to do something. If I don't help these people, if I don't get myself involved in advocating the rights of sex workers, then I feel I've not done justice to them. Because we are very familiar with the plight of other people, but we never really turn our attention to people who are engaging in activities like sex. So before we even place judgments on a sex worker based on what they are doing, I think the first step is to ensuring that we understand their full story. Because if we do not know their full story, then why are we passing judgments based on what they do? And there comes the most important question for today. So what can we do to ameliorate the plight of sex workers today? Once again, I also grew up with this saying that goes, "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step." And the first step, I feel, is we should spread awareness. In order to ensure that we have a greater understanding of the plight of sex workers, I believe that we should be able to spread awareness. So I urge all the audience today to go and spread awareness about the plight of sex workers. Talk to your friends beside you. Later during lunch, you can have a chat about this. After today, you can go to your family members or to your friends and talk to them about this. And if you don't believe me that some people are still oblivious about this issue, feel free to go and ask your friends if they know anything about the sex worker industry before telling them more. Then you will start to get what I'm trying to get you at. Now, once you have established the awareness, I feel the next step is to support local NGOs that are advocating for sex rights, sex worker rights. And one of the NGOs that support sex worker rights is Project X in Singapore. Project X has this famous tagline that goes, "More than just condoms." Right? Many of the times when we think about helping sex workers, we only feel that we should ensure that sex workers do not contract diseases such as HIV or AIDS. But we never really go beyond that because we don't perceive sex workers to be one of us. And what I'm trying to ask all of us today is to ensure that they too are included in our society. Because like what people have mentioned today, they are also part of our economy. And the reason why we are successful could also be part of them that we are completely oblivious to. And if we do not give them the social support, the emotional support, as well as in times of crisis or in times of problems, they may even require legal advice. If you do not give them the needs that they too deserve, then this can become problematic because we are dehumanizing them from the very start. Now then, after we are done with spreading awareness and supporting local NGOs, I believe that the most important step comes in when you reset your mind. Why do I say that? Because today's theme is definitely resetting your mind. Now, how do we reset our mind? This is a question that I've been struggling to answer for many years. The education system has taught me many things, but to answer a question that is so broad, it's very difficult from the very start for me. And I believe the first step into restarting your mind is to ensure that we question ourselves. We start questioning. So the next time you see a sex worker in the train, in the bus, or in the public, ask yourself, Should I judge this person just because of what he or what she does? Should I attach negative stigmas to these people? And should I even call them these people? Or are they one of us? So the next time you see a sex worker, throw those thoughts away and instead express a kind gesture to them. And if you got the time, just talk to them. They just need someone to talk to. And you never know, this might open a whole new world of conversations. And from then, we can bring about changes that we never see coming. And to end it all off, I would like to leave all of you with this story of Latika that really moved me as a person. Her story was published 2 weeks ago. And Latika was a single mother sex worker who came from India, Pondicherry. She was working under this pimp. She was working under this pimp from the very start when she came to Singapore. And one day, while she was performing sex work, she realized that she was robbed of $200 when she realized that she lost her purse. And when that happened, she wanted to seek redressal from the authorities. So she went to the police and told them about what had happened. And while she was explaining her situation to the police, she also blurted out that she was a sex worker working under this pimp. The next day, the pimp found out that Latika had divulged the information of the pimp to the authorities. The pimp got into a very heated argument that led Latika to have multiple stitches on her. And at that point of time, Latika's health was already deteriorating. She was suffering from acute pancreatitis. And because of this incident, she was asked by authorities to be detained in Singapore and act as a witness. And after a period of time, Latika finally passed away. Now this brings back the most saddest story that I've ever read in my entire life, because it made me feel that we as individuals, and if we came together, we could have saved Latika's life if we just supported her. Yes, she was subjected to abuse, but if we just were to be a nicer person, and if we were to help her through local NGOs or any other forms, we could have saved Latika's life. And that's why I urge all of the audience today to think about this story. And more importantly, change our perspectives about how we look at sex workers. Because you never know, the next time you see a sex worker, you might just find something new. Thank you.